Today on The Communicative Leader, we welcome Andres Lares, the managing partner at Shapiro Negotiations Institute and co-author of Persuade, the four-step process to influence people and decisions. Lares' expertise ranges from coaching live negotiations for sports clients, like maybe you've heard of them, the Cleveland Browns, the Brooklyn Nets, and more, to developing online content for facilitating real estate, advisory, media, banking, and pharmaceutical programs. He is also a recognized contributor to numerous national media outlets like Forbes, Entrepreneur, Selling Power, Sales and Marketing Management, Training Mag, and many more. And he's taken time to chat with us today. We're going to think about the big impact that soft skills like communication, my friends, the way that this influences your ability to succeed in the workplace. Hello, and welcome to The Communicative Leader, hosted by me, Dr. Leah O'Million-Hodges. My friends call me Dr. O. I'm a professor of communication and a leadership communication expert. On The Communicative Leader, we're working to make your work life what you want it to be. Andres, thank you for visiting us today on The Communicative Leader. You're working in an area that is near and dear to my heart, I know to our listeners. And before we dive in, I was hoping you could give us a little more of your background that led you to where you are today, a managing partner at Shapiro Negotiations Institute.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and you always wonder how will you summarize a whole lifetime, even a professional career in a short period of time. But I have to admit, a good chunk of that is luck, and I think probably that could be said for just about anyone. But really, I've always been interested in the topic, and when I went to grad school, and it kind of led me to find this position in the first place, I was attracted for a different reason. Because S&I does a lot of sports work. We help teams negotiate player contracts and sponsorship agreements. And so those are kind of high profile negotiations, if you will. And that's what brought me here. And that was about 15 years ago. And then I have stayed. And then since about 7 or 8 years ago, I took over the business. And I've stayed because of all the other pieces. I still very much enjoy the sports, which is what brought me here. And that's some of the client work I enjoy the most. But it's the kind of the running of the business and the growing of the business and learning about a lot of different industries. One day working in sports, the next day in manufacturing, the next day in tech. And so that's really what's kind of kept me interested every day. Every day is different. And we work with some incredible clients. And I feel like there's satisfaction because you get to see the fruits of your labor in the sense that you track some of the results and you get to have an impact on a business that's already highly functioning. That's been very... It has brought a lot of satisfaction to me.
Yeah, that is so neat. And I love the idea too with what you're talking to us about today. It sounds like you've been in a number of different roles in this organization, some like internally focused with conversations, certainly a lot of client, external work, soft skills, again, a huge part of all of that. So, when we think about soft skills, it was hoping you could kind of define how you think about them and then kind of help us see why they are so essential today in leadership communication, especially with this way the workplace continues to evolve so quickly.
Yeah. So, the pressure's on to provide a good definition of soft skills. But I think when I think of it, I think of a few things. I think they're interpersonal skills. I think of it determining how someone effectively works with and communicates with others. And I think also how they manage themselves. So those are kind of the three parts that come interpersonal, communicating and working with others, and then really managing yourself. And so that's really what comes to mind when you think of it. I think it's one of the reasons that we're going to talk about it so much today is that that's really critical in every part of our life, right? That's part of our personal life, whether it's a spouse or kids or parents or friends. And that's certainly professional life in the sense that whether you're not only managing people, but also managing up colleagues, working in groups. And so they're really critical skills. And I know we'll talk a lot about that. Excited to dig into that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So I'm a leadership communication scholar, but my PhD is in communication. And I think if someone wants to see rapid change, positive change, or I guess negative in their life, it's a focus on communication for positive, or kind of throwing your hands up and walking away from those interpersonal skills. And that connection is the way to see it deteriorate really quickly as well.
Yeah, and for better or worse, I think just like I think in a kind of a personal relationship, in a working relationship, doing good work or being a good person or whatever
Mm-hmm.
it may be is important, but how that gets communicated with other people is so important, right? So you have two people
Mm-hmm.
that do the same job, but if
Yep.
one person's a particularly good communicator and one person's
Mm-hmm.
average, I would say we would all bet on that first person to really succeed and flourish in that organization much faster, be much more successful. And so you
Yep.
could actually have the same work product quality, but the
Mm-hmm.
communication means that you're going to have better relationships, and
Yep.
those relationships will lead to more promotions and more success. And so I think that's important to think about in how much this impacts over the course of a career.
Yeah, I could not agree more. So one thing you've found in some research is we know there's this demand for soft skills, but we're seeing about half of workers think that their employers actually prioritize these qualities. So what do you see? What's the reason for this gap, or what do you experience or speculate? What's going on here?
And it's hard to know. It's probably each a little different, but there's definitely some themes and some trends
Mm-hmm.
that I either have heard, seen, or I think we can, with some confidence, project. And first of all, they're the hardest to develop, and they're the now. But the key there being that they can be developed, right? So if you think of
Mm-hmm.
certainly leadership, and that's right up your bailiwick and your experience, those are things that there is some nature there. Some people are born with
Mm-hmm.
more advanced soft skills, but
Mm-hmm.
they absolutely can. And there's endless amount of research to indicate that they can be improved over
Yep.
time, and experience is
Mm-hmm.
some certainly training. And so, but I think they're harder to develop and also take more time to develop and harder to track. Right. So if you think of what
Mm-hmm.
we talked about today so far already, we talked about leadership, we talked about
Yep.
communications, and I think we both agree, and I think to every listener, communication skills will certainly be correlated with success. But then, how do
Mm-hmm.
you measure whether you or I are a 7 out of 10 communicators or an 8 out of 10 communicator?
Yep.
And so that becomes harder. And so, if you think of the technical training, right, if you work in a
Mm-hmm.
factory and you're slightly more effective at doing
Yep.
your job, you can see the output in that factory. Or if you're a digital marketer and you see the results and the cost per click for a campaign you run, those are ways that you
Mm-hmm.
can kind of track the performance of someone and the training they did. But if you talk about being a better leader, being a better communicator, being a better negotiator, those are a little harder. Now, we are fortunate, and this will be weaved in today. Negotiation of all the soft skills is one of the easiest to track. So, the two most common roles we train are sales
Mm-hmm.
and procurement. So, we train lots of leaders and engineers and lots of other roles, but project managers. But in those two, and the reason they are, I think that is not
Mm-hmm.
a coincidence, if you will, that sales and procurement are the two where it's easiest to track, right? What are your margins
Mm-hmm.
before we come in and after? What are your revenues per person? What's your average sales cycle? What is the strength of your relationships with your partners, or the price that you pay to procure a good? And so I think that's one of the reasons that we're fortunate to be in the soft skills area, but one that's probably the closest to being trackable,
Mm-hmm.
because it's hard to invest a whole bunch of money crossing your fingers
Mm-hmm.
that 5 years from
Yeah.
now, this will get an ROI that I'm not even sure whether the ROI
Yes.
is positive or not.
Yeah. Another thing I've noticed, and you've probably seen this too, back to measurement, people aren't the best judges of their own communication abilities or what they're putting out. So sometimes we might rate ourselves lower. So people who don't necessarily like public speaking, they might be pretty good at it with time and practice, but they might still rate really low. And others are like, nope, that's fine. What we see more often is people tend to think they are warm and leaning into these interpersonal skills and relationship oriented when that's not what is being communicated to others. So we typically need self and um, other sources of evaluation, which again, in organizations, that's more time, more resources.
Exactly. So now comprehensively it takes a while to train. It's hard to
Mm-hmm.
track. Requires an assessment not only from the individual participant but also those around them, right? A 360
Yep.
degree to see,
Yep.
is Andres actually a better communicator now, according to my boss, according to my
Yep.
peers, according to those that I name?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's holistic. Now, of course, will the returns happen if you do that systematically? Yes. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the reasons very well run companies outperform others,
Yeah.
but it's certainly it could be hard, it could be costly, it could be time consuming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this next question is is about timeliness, and especially timely with the advent of AI and figuring out what that looks like in organizations, what that looks like in home life. But we know that most people mention having these interpersonal skills, these soft skills, is timeless. So, kind of walk us through what you see as being, classic about this. At what it's going to be helpful is helpful 50 years ago, today, and in the future. And what happens to the importance of these skills as we continue to see more tech advancements?
So I find this a really interesting question and topic because it's unbelievably complex in the sense that if
Mm-hmm.
you think of just technology, we go even broader than AI. Clearly, technology has changed the way we communicate, right? If you walk
Mm-hmm.
into a room of, let's call it an early high school class, and you were allow them to behave in any way they'd want, they'd probably be all messing each other, even though they're sitting beside each other. They'd be on technology, messing each other rather than talking to each other. And so, as far as, if you go to a concert now and there's a lot of younger generational folks, every single person has their phone recording,
Mm-hmm.
taking pictures, versus if you think back to, 20 years ago, that scene would have been everyone absorbing. Even when
Mm-hmm.
cell phones and cameras were available, it was the focus on enjoying the moment rather than, potentially either taking a picture or video and being able to share that with friends, family,
Yeah.
whatever it may be. So I think the way we communicate and experience is changing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one. So I think
Yeah.
communication's changing because of that. But I think when we
Mm-hmm.
more specifically then get into AI, what we're seeing and hearing and also
Mm-hmm.
some of the research even from our clients that kind of do it systematically is that these soft skills are becoming actually more important in the sense that now you've got managing people, managing now decisions where there's more data than ever, right? And there's inputs from people, there's inputs from
Mm-hmm.
technology, there's inputs from AI. Combining all of that together and making decisions and motivating
Yeah.
folks and being effective and productive is actually harder. And so
Mm-hmm.
it does make your life easier in many ways, right? All these mundane tasks, automated tasks can just be done
Mm-hmm.
for you. But then the higher level skills, which oftentimes are tied to soft skills, I
Yeah.
think are becoming more valuable. And so, for example, we see Google when they come out with every
Mm-hmm.
now and then kind of the most important skills that they see in the future. It's essentially all soft skills. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's not a surprise because those are the things that are harder to automate, right? Are harder to have AI
Yes.
replace, at least for the foreseeable future.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with you that the way that we experience communication is changing and changing so rapidly too. So let's think about the employer perspective. So we know that we continue to see statistics and studies reiterating the need for these soft skills, and people, really enjoy when interacting with those who are skilled at this. So we have this demand from all these different perspectives, but how do we get our employers on board? So, how do we convince them to invest in soft skills when a lot of times they're not seen as the most immediate business needs? Because, they're not, like you're saying, tied to a specific line or typically a metric. And we know it's going to be an investment. So, what is that? I don't know if it's like a bit of persuasion to those in the C suite or compelling argument, but how do we get them on board?
So it's interesting. One, what I wish we could do, and then I think we can
Mhm.
talk about what realistically can be done. But what I wish we could do is have anyone who's considering it have a couple of conversations with leaders in a few different organizations.
Mhm.
So I can walk you through 5 or 6 industries where we work with really leaders in the space. So very
Mhm.
large multinational companies that are very successful. And if we just rate success, it could be a lot of ways. But let's say that their shareholders have made a lot of money over the last 5 or 10
Mhm.
years. And then some that have been stagnant. And
Okay.
there's lots of differences, but one that I think is perfectly correlated with success or lack of success
Mhm.
is that investment in their people. And I think the reason that
Mhm.
is not only when you train folks on soft skills, do you
Mhm.
improve the skills that long term they'll be able to then improve the company, but that investment in people is valued. And so that means that they're
Mhm.
more likely to stay. That means you're recruiting better talent. So all of those things are
Mhm.
really what's happening. So I think anyone, if they had a few conversations with leaders at that, company A and then company B, where you saw the difference between high performing over a long period of time and not, I think it would become very obvious, but I just don't know that's realistic. So the more realistic practical plan, I think, is to start with the folks that have been there a while and are likely to be there a while, and then focus on the most practical set of soft skills that are most likely to give you that return on investment. And so again, I think that's why we end up sometimes being a conduit for companies to invest a lot more money in soft skills, because we might train an entire procurement organization on negotiation. Well,
Yeah.
then all of a sudden, when procurement has better results, then that leads to sales, the second spot, or vice versa. And then, though, they might say, we'd like to have some of our leaders go through this, and
Yep.
engineers and marketing. And so then that'll lead to potentially communication skills, influencing skills, leadership skills. And that's why we see negotiation is typically done before influencing, because it's easier to track the impact rather than influencing. And a lot of people have that in the category. It comes up in assessments all the time with their clients, but they're
Yeah.
less likely to pull the trigger on that because it's going to be harder to track. And so someone's going to have to justify that expense. So that's kind of what we've seen and what I think is realistic.
Yeah. Yep. So true. And you're talking about these high performing organizations. When they're investing, they have more skills, more retention. And I think we always underestimate how much organizational knowledge leaves with employees. We tend to think of just the role that needs to be filled and not what they take with them. And so, of course, there's that tangible cost, but it's much larger than we tend to see when we're looking at a spreadsheet. So I really like that that perspective that you shared with us.
And I think I love the way you put it, because I think once you've been a manager and had to replace a few people, because if it's one time, maybe you got
Yep.
very lucky.
Yep.
But it's very difficult to find really good talent. And even if you find the right person and they're in the right job, they need to be trained, they need to spend time, and the corporate knowledge transfer takes a while. And so as much as you should be happy for folks that leave onto bigger and better opportunities, because personally, you should be happy for them, their team
Yep.
members, there is clearly a cost to that. And so I think it's often forgotten, or for those that haven't had to deal with it, don't realize how impactful that is.
So this next question piggybacks on that previous one with this desire. So we also know that employees keep saying, I want more development with my teamwork, with communication, with leadership. So if we know there's already this desire, what are ways that organizations can lean into this? So again, we're creating some type of program or training program, but also benefiting the organization in ways. So how would you suggest, or what should organizations do?
So one thing that is worth mentioning, so that we're not just beating up on organizations that, hey, they all know they want it and it's being valued, they're not doing it. I would say, and I think more and more studies will be out there, but there's certainly, from everything I've seen, heard, even whether it's in our organization or clients, there's turnover was very significant during COVID, but I believe that the average span of time in an organization will permanently be shorter, or at least for a sustained period of time. And we've kind of seen that for a few years now. So that is in the defense, if you will, quote unquote, for organizations to spend less developing,
Certainly.
right? Because if I develop you and you're going to spend an average of 2 years here, not 5, then right at the time where I'm starting to get return on my investment on that training, you're gone.
Yeah.
And so, and I remember when I came in, for example, I remember hearing a lot of the organizations we worked with would rave about, when I asked what was the best training you ever went through, sometimes they'd bring up some leadership training. I remember I would hear a lot, folks that a lot of the sales leaders at some of the best performing sales organizations all over the world came from Xerox, because they actually trained their people so well that actually branched into essentially what became a sales training industry.
Yeah.
That stuck with me, because they were so good at internally training. They were just focusing on being better the next month, next year, next 5 years.
Yeah.
But they were so good that they essentially created executives in just about every other industry. And I think so, because you're less likely to keep those people for a long time. I think it's one of the reasons you're seeing less investment or kind of hesitancy. But what can you do? I think if you look back at kind of the things that we all understand intuitively, everybody wants to enjoy their work, enjoy their peers, respect their boss, feel valued, and produce satisfying work, right? Everybody wants that. And so if you think of training, it helps you with just about every one of those, right? If you're more skilled, you can produce more satisfying work. And we know that that is a driver for folks. We know that
Mm-hmm.
if you communicate better, you're likely to have better relationships with your peers, your bosses. You're more likely to be valued, which in turn better compensated. So if you just think of it at a very rudimentary level, it does all
Mm-hmm.
these things. But then you've got to be willing to risk the unfortunate piece that you're going to invest in quite a few folks, and some of them will leave before you get a return on investment. So
Mm-hmm.
then the plus minus has to be worth your while.
Yep. And I love pointing out that reciprocal relationship there where it's benefits the organization and of course we're benefiting the people and for some organizations like you said that might just have to be good enough at a certain point and recognizing what training would look like down the road. So if we have an organization that wants to implement a soft skills training, how does a leader go about it? How do they prioritize this process to make it systematic? Like how does Xerox end up creating all of these, essentially trainers that go out and are doing this so well?
So I think the first thing is you ideally want to have an assessment of some sort, and this could be done in a kind of a more academic or objective way through surveying, or it can be done not necessarily less objective, but less systematic, and maybe it's through interviewing
Mm-hmm.
leadership or whatever it may be. Right?
Mm-hmm.
There has to be first, okay, what do we really need? Then I think you have to set your goals and objectives because I think all too often people talk about, okay, what we need is X training, but you're still kind of a rudderless ship in the sense that you're
Yeah.
not, you have the more defined your objectives are, the more successful you'll be. So number one, I think assessment of some kind, then to narrow it down, then goals and objectives. Then I
Mm-hmm.
think you need to get buy-in from leadership. And so if it's being run by, the training part of the organization, then there has to be
Mm-hmm.
leadership buy-in and vice versa too. Then creating kind of a timeline and implementation plan. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that is more important than people think. If you think about, for example, we do a lot of global work. Well,
Yeah.
it's significantly more costly to have in-person training, for example, but most of our clients prefer it. So not
Mm-hmm.
every client. There's some that we can do some pretty interesting and unique
Mm-hmm.
things online live, which is great. But there's some clients that really have a culture of in person, or also
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes it's actually connected to they're bringing back everyone into the office, so actually want
Mm.
to listen to person training
Yeah.
because if it's well received, it's another reason to come in the office.
Yep.
So those are things you have to think about in the implementation plan because now that's a whole different animal to be able to kind of
Mm-hmm.
logistically plan. Then I think you got to tailor the training, so it's got to be relevant.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's an outside company, they got to tailor. If it's an inside company, you got to adjust it based on the function. I think then the implementation of the training has to be really kind of hands-on, engaging, interactive, and I say this sensitively, but enjoyable, right? If you want people
Mm-hmm.
to be focused throughout the training, you've got to enjoy the experience. Then you got to reinforce the training because you did it. And if you just kind of rinse your hands off and say, all right,
Yeah.
training, good luck to everybody. I hope they keep doing it. That's not going to be enough for sustained
Mm-hmm.
performance improvement. And then I think at the end, you got to track the results. And again, it can be through ROI if you can track key performance
Yep.
indicators. It could be through 360-degree assessments. It could be through participant
Mm-hmm.
interviews. But there has to be some way to have a sense of are we accomplishing or looking like we're in the direction of accomplishing these goals that we set out from the get-go. So that's a pretty lengthy set of steps, which probably
Mm-hmm.
takes us back to your original question of why don't as many do it? And to
Yep.
do it really well, you got to do those
Mm-hmm.
things. Now,
Yep.
hopefully, you choose a partner that will do that for you, or at least help
Mm-hmm.
you do that. But
Mm-hmm.
obviously, that this is time intensive.
Mm-hmm. And I love that you make it systematic. So I've seen in some organizational work there are buzzwords. And it's like, well, we need this. Okay, tell me why. Well, I heard this is important. You're like, nope. What's the data say? What do your people say? And my next two questions, actually, you've kind of already touched on them. So first, I'd like you to kind of expand. What do you see as the role of leaders, either, direct managers, the C-suite? What is their responsibility in terms of the environment to help their teams grow soft skills?
So, for this, because we've talked a little bit about it, I'll kind of take a slightly different
Mm-hmm.
approach. This is very practically what we've seen the best clients do.
Mm-hmm.
So, the best clients, the leaders will take the training before the rest of their group.
Mm-hmm.
Because by the time the rest of the group is
Yep.
taking the training, that signals to everybody that my
Mm-hmm.
leader, if I'm a project manager, program, whatever it may be, whatever role I'm an engineer, that
Mm-hmm.
says that my leaders thought this was important enough to take.
Yep.
That also means that now they can continue to coach to it and reinforce it because they know the language.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's number one. And then when you do that, they're also kind of collaborating in the process to then roll it out to their teams so that it is relevant, it is tailored.
Yep.
So I think that's the biggest thing that we see. The best performing clients when they implement it is that simple. It's a simple recipe, but it's
Mm-hmm.
easy with how busy we all are to get sidetracked and all of a sudden not do that, and then away you go.
Yeah, exactly. And then the follow up to that you've mentioned, reinforcement. And I think this can be especially tricky when you have something nebulous like communication or soft skills. So, what does that look like? Like, what do you coach for that day to day integration so it becomes, part of the norms and the rhythms of the organization rather than, oh, I did this training. Okay, I've got to check this one skill off the list when my manager's looking, and then we forget about it.
So I think the reinforcement, we can talk about the one thing I would say that's kind of the precursor to that. That's kind of the requirement, you will, almost prerequisite to even talk about reinforcement, is that the training has to be delivered in a way that's a process and systematic. So it's got to be built in a way that's sustainable to actually really kind of implement, if you will, right? So,
Yeah.
and so we talk about it in our training, for example, as a common language. So first you implement the common language, which makes it coachable. So that, and then when you think of reinforcement, then of course there's mobile apps and there's lunch and learns and there's books and there's lots of things you can do. There's role playing, there's coaching sessions, but it's easier to do because there's a framework that you are reinforcing in the first place. So that's one of the reasons why the 27 ways to close, for example, might make a really sexy blog article title. It will be very difficult for you to implement because you're not going to remember 27 ways to close or 14 ways to make someone uncomfortable.
Yep.
But if it's a simple process, a year from now, you'll remember that process. And if in that meantime of the year, you're talking about it with your colleagues and your boss is talking about it, then that becomes kind of part of the company culture. And so that is the piece that really is, really kind of the final determinant of whether or not it's going to be successful over a long period of time.
Yeah. And I love your organization's focus on that shared language because we overlook that. We rely on jargon, rely on acronyms, can be really isolating and alienating for folks. And that does not achieve what we're hoping to achieve. And so that focus, again, that gives us that foundation we need for anything else moving forward. It's amazing that you all do that.
Yeah, it's that is a perfect example. One of the things that when we're talking about folks, they'll say like, what's a question that we haven't asked that we should, which I think is a really interesting question to ask, or what are we not talking about? And that's one of the few things that we bring up, that you're not giving enough importance to this. You're thinking about what do the modules cover, but you're not thinking about, if you're really thinking long-term, you want to improve performance, how do you create that environment where that's likely to happen? And that is a very important determining factor.
Yeah, amazing. So this next question, I want to lean more into your personal insights. So, that you've worked with really prestigious clients. I'm going to name drop the Cleveland Browns, and you've taught at various universities. What are your personal experiences have shaped your understanding and the importance of soft skills and leadership?
I think one of the experiences that always sticks with me, and it started early on in my career and has almost been cemented the more and more we do work with just about any type of company, is it's a really interesting situation that the better you are at your job, engineer, R&D, sales, procurement, whatever it may be, marketer, the better you are at your job, the more likely you are to be promoted. And eventually promotions mean managing people and leading people. And again, this will be even more so in your space than mine, but there's really not a lot of overlap in the skills of a good marketer and a good manager, a good salesperson, a good manager. Now, we're going to assume that good communication skills can probably help you be better at sales, better at marketing, better at procurement, and also a better leader. But there's a Venn diagram and there's some overlap, but it's certainly not a perfect overlap. And so it's interesting. We're structurally still built to be that way, that we get promoted. And so as a matter of fact, I think it's detrimental in some cases. If you think of like the best procurement person you have, the best engineer you have, the best software engineer, you're actually taking the best software engineer away from your team. You're making him or her a manager. And so they may or may not be a good manager, a good leader. And now you've lost your best engineer. And so I think it's really interesting. And so that is really one of the things that reminds me of the importance of soft skills, the complexity of it, the importance of developing it. And so I think that just for whatever reason, that really sticks with me as something that I've seen everywhere, and but it's hard to combat. I get it, right? If you're not promoting based on the ability to do that job, how are you promoting then? It can be difficult. So I get it.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. A lot of my research has been on middle managers lately and looking at how, again, they are experts in their particular area. So naturally they get promoted, but then all of a sudden they're expected to carry out skills they maybe have never had training on. They're being assessed on these new skills, right? So they're essentially promoted, but to a whole new area that doesn't necessarily embrace or allow them to capitalize on those skills. And that's problematic for everyone involved. So now we have two final questions for you. And I really hate to begin to wrap up this interview because I'm learning so much and having such a great time. But the way we end all episodes of The Communicative Leader is with two intertwined questions. And it is this idea of what is your tip or challenge or advice for the first part, our titled leaders out there, and the second part for employees across all industries and across all ranks.
So I think two come to mind for leaders. I think, and probably counterintuitive from being done, everyone probably thinks and knows that this should be done more, but maybe doing it actually, but listening more than you speak, in the sense that I think we often romanticize a leader as someone, and the same, I hear this all the time, the best negotiators are like smooth talkers, and they're not. The best negotiators are people who ask great questions to really uncover what the other side cares about, so you can help deliver some of that in order to meet your objectives and theirs. And the same as a leader. A leader's asking great questions and really listening and understanding and having a good heartbeat on what everyone else is thinking and feeling. So I think that's number one. And then number two is about decision making. And we've delved into decision making more and more over time, especially as we've gone deeper into influencing. And it is about getting all the information possible to make a good decision, having a very good decision making process. But then once you make a decision, unless there's new information that changes things dramatically, being confident in your decision and almost essentially making it the right one. I think it can be hard that when you spend all this time making a decision, you make it, and then you're uncertain, right? You spend so much time making a decision, there's an uncertainty. And I think the uncertainty of the decision actually changes the outcome of it, in turn creating more uncertainty, because maybe not right. The moment you hit a roadblock, ooh, I shouldn't have done this, or maybe I didn't make the right decision. But it's, you've got to kind of trust the process that you had. So I think those are the two things that come to mind.
Can I ask you about the process? Like, do you have a specific process you tend to use in your organization or personally, or is this something everyone kind of develops on their own?
I think people develop on their own. We have a couple of things from how it's prioritized. We have kind of an axis of how important is something and how time sensitive is something. And that helps us kind of prioritize and make decisions on what's going to be the focus, right? So, because you can't do everything all the time. So that's kind of an easy one. It's just an X and Y quadrant, and so simple, which is so great, because then that guides our conversations, right? Is this something that's really important, but really important, it can be done this year? Is ironically going to get actually pushed to the back burner a little bit, then somewhat important, but needs to be done this week. And then the other one, I think, is kind of a weighted matrix, right? We think about, okay, what's kind of the expected value of these and how likely is it to occur? And then we build it that way. And it sounds almost highly mathematical. I think, and I've said this, the decisions we've made that way, very rarely are we perfectly spot on what the chances are of each one of those things occurring. But the thought process has been very, very helpful. So even if these are the 5 things that are likely to happen if we go this way, these are the 3 things that have to go this way, what are the chances of each, and how much is each worth to us as a company or as a business unit? Even though you're going to be totally off realistically because of all this other information that maybe you're not aware of, that process has led to better decisions, more confidence in decisions. And I'd say that talking through all those things have led to much better decisions. So that's what we've used as a company and what I've used personally.
Yeah. Well, and I love too, if you're looking at the importance and time sensitivity, we're leaning back into that shared language that becomes a shared model, which, when we're all working from the same place, it's amazing how much easier work becomes and how much better that output is as a result.
Absolutely, I love that. It's like the simplest thing, but if everyone's has the same structure and model, already the communication is so
Yeah,
much easier.
exactly. And so that second part, advice for all employees across all ranks, industries, what do you want to leave them with?
I think in this case, kind of almost where we started, that don't underestimate the importance of communication skills.
Mhm,
Right. I think we all want to do our job really well, as we should. But I think communication skills, networking, I think of, career success. A lot of people that I know, myself included, I've never even
mhm,
really applied for a job, right?
mhm.
It's been relationships all along
Yeah.
the way. And it
Mhm,
makes sense now that I'm hiring.
mhm,
I'm considering two candidates. One has been vetted by someone that I know well and trust,
mhm.
and they're saying this is a good candidate. And another one
Yep.
looks very good, but I've never met them before and I have no
Mhm,
reference that I can count on. Well, if one is likely to be that good, the other one at best case scenario is that good, it takes away the risk, it de-risks it, and they go that way. And so I
mhm,
think that, communication becomes networking, all that becomes a really kind of core success factor in your profession,
mhm.
whatever it is that you do. So I think it's one of those things that we intuitively know, but I think are easy to forget. So I think that's
Yes.
a reminder of that.
Yes, I could not agree with you more. Right. So I really think I always say communication is your leadership litmus test, because a lot of times we see a leader and we don't recognize how we're assessing someone and saying, yes, you're a leader. And no, I don't really see you in that light, but it's their verbals, their nonverbals, the way they make you feel when they interact with you, the tone and all of that. Again, back to that communication.
Hmm.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for joining us today on The Communicative Leader. This has been so much fun. I appreciate the work you're doing, and I really appreciate you sharing your time and expertise, because I know this conversation is going to have a big impact on many.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you having me, and I hope that folks got something out of it today.
All right, my friends, that wraps up our conversation today. Until next time, communicate with intention and lead with purpose. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon on The Communicative Leader.